Is it possible to double my money on this used mountain bike? In this video, I'll show you what it takes to bring this unwanted 2016 Boardman back to its full potential and see if we can generate some profit that will go towards the e-bike that I plan to surprise my dad with at the end of this series. So I've been pretty blown away with the response to this series so far. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to those of you that have been liking and commenting on the videos. Now, one thing that I always try and do is to get feedback to see if there's anything that I can improve on. And one of the top comments was a request to see more behind the scenes on this series about how I find the bikes and specifically how I know there's value in them to be able to flip them. And I think this bike in particular is a perfect example of that. So I've actually had my eye on this bike since the very start of this challenge. Now, it was listed about 7 weeks ago for £300, which I thought at the time was fairly expensive given the actual listing itself, and I'll go through that right now. Unfortunately, the listing was deleted straight after I bought the bike, so I don't have any pictures of the listing as such, but I have found an example that I think represents what I'm talking about quite well. So the first thing that I noticed was that the photos were really poor quality. They didn't really show the bike in any great detail, but what you could see about the bike was that it was dirty, it hadn't been washed, it was covered in dust and cobwebs. Now, I do actually remember the description on this bike because it was particularly bad. It said, "Bike in great condition, always been looked after. Look at the tyres, it's barely being used. Back brake has issues, but it will be pennies to fix." Let's just break this down. So the problem is when you say the bike's in great condition and it's been looked after, and then you see the photos of the bike all dusty and covered in cobwebs, there's an immediate contradiction there which is going to put most people off. The second thing, and I see this happen all the time, is people say, oh, the bike has issues, but it will be pennies to fix. But people aren't stupid, and people are going to immediately go, well, if it's pennies to fix, why haven't you fixed it? It also contradicts that first statement that was made about the bike being in good condition. The other thing is, and I always find this on Facebook Marketplace, is 95% of people don't have mechanical skills to work on a bike. So if there are any major issues on the bike, you've already lost 95% of your potential customer base. Anyway, so all these things, whilst they're red flags for the majority of people out there, they're actually green flags for me. So when I see a listing like that, as long as there's nothing in the description to suggest that the seller won't be reasonable or open to an offer, I'll save the listing, and then in a few weeks' time, when they've had no interest, I'll come in with a cash offer to buy it right there and then. And 9 times out of 10, people will go, do you know what? It's been sat around. Nobody's given any offers. This person can come this morning, say, and then you can come in and generally they'll accept a lower offer. So I'd seen examples of this particular bike going for well over £300 on eBay in reasonable condition. And my thinking was that if I can get the bike for fairly cheap, and there's nothing major that needs doing to it or nothing that's too expensive, then there's a real possibility that I'll be able to double my money on this bike. And that is the challenge that I wanted to set myself, to see if I could double my cash. And as you know, this is all for a good purpose. So all the profits get reinvested into the next project. And then eventually I'm going to use the pot of money to buy an e-bike for my dad. But if I can double the money, that would be fantastic. It just means I can get the e-bike sooner and me and him can get out while the weather's still nice in the UK. So I knew I needed to get the bike for a good deal initially. So when I was ready to start bidding on the bike, it had been listed for 7 weeks and the seller had actually reduced it to £250. So to me, that really shows that the bike had very little interest. I initialised the conversation by just confirming that it was only the back brakes that had the problem, and they confirmed that that was the case. And then I came in and said, look, would you do a cash offer of £170 if I could collect today? And they very politely told me to go do one. Now, at this point in the series, I only had £170, so I physically couldn't offer any more. But in the last episode, I found a way of very quickly generating some more cash for the project. So make sure to watch that episode if you're interested. And then after that, I came in with a revised cash offer of £190. Now, my thinking was here, if the seller doesn't budge at all, if it doesn't prompt a counter offer, then I'm probably way too far off their bottom price that they're willing to accept. And at that point, that's fine because the stars don't always align. Some people just expect to get a lot of money for the bike. They're happy to sit on it for 6 months until they finally realise that it's not worth that much. And that's fine because you just move on to the next bike and just do the same thing again. There's hundreds of bikes out there, so it's not exactly difficult to find another one. But luckily the seller saw some reason and came in with a counter offer and said I could have the bike for £200 if I picked it up that afternoon. And to be honest, that was perfect for me, so I accepted the offer. While I was happy to get the bike, I think at that price it's going to be really challenging to try and double our money, but I'm willing to give it a go anyway. So let's take a deeper look at the bike and see exactly what we need to do in order to flip it for hopefully a lot more money. Now, the first thing that I did when I got the bike was to take it outside and give it a very quick wash, just get all the cobwebs and all the dust off it, just bucket and sponge wash, which as you can see has made a really big difference already to how the bike looks. I think if I were to relist this again right now, I probably would be able to get $250 for it. But first, let's have a look at the things that are particularly wrong on the bike and the areas that we can improve to hopefully get that extra profit. In terms of the general condition of the bike, I think it's in fairly reasonable condition to say that it's coming up to 9 years old. There are a few paint chips, as you can see there. Now, I think what I'm going to do is try and touch those up, but I of course will show photos of that in my listings. I think the last thing that you want to be is dishonest in touching these things up, because it won't be perfect, it will still be visible. So I would rather people, if they're bidding or willing to put money on the line for this bike, I'd rather they know about the defects that there is. There's no play in it, there's no play in the pedals, spinning nice and freely without much sound. So I think bottom bracket's fine, which is great. The headset, I think, just needs tightening up a little bit. We'll just have a look at the condition of that when we drop the forks out. The forks actually, despite them compressing quite nicely, they feel really dry. The seals, they don't really look too warm. So what we'll do is we'll drop the lowers out, put some nice new oil in and give it a lower leg service. One thing that I thought was pretty odd was how low the saddle was when I went to go and pick the bike up. Obviously it's easier for me to get in the car like that. I just noticed that this seat post clamp is way too high up. I think that's meant to be down here. So just going to take that off. And just initially looking at it, this looks really scored up actually. So I'm just going to remove, oh no. What on earth? Okay, so that explains why the seller had the seat post all the way down. I probably should have checked that, but the problem is with this, if I sand this all the way back and then respray it, it's not going to look that great. And I'm potentially going to remove a load of material in doing that. It'll probably impact how the seat post fits in there. I'm not necessarily sure I feel confident removing any material from a part that, if it snaps, that could be a really, really bad catastrophic failure and cause someone some really bad injury. So I think I'm just going to have to replace this, to be honest, and then try and figure out what's actually gone on here. Just chuck that down there. Yeah, it looks like what's happened is someone's just clamped this right onto the top here, and then they've just dug in that edge into the seat post. Yeah, ow, that is quite sharp. So I'll clean this all up, make sure that it's okay, and then we'll reinstall it properly with a brand new seat post. So one of the things that was mentioned on the listing was the fact that this butt brake is catching quite a bit and it gets stuck on. So I need to potentially look at rebleeding and resetting the pistons on the brake and just make sure that it is working fine. Of course, the brakes are a really important component of a bike, so got to try and make sure that they're operating properly. This bike has got two very different brakes on it. So I believe these are the original brakes. So this is the one that needs resetting and bleeding. Now this uses .4 fluid, as you can see there. You can also tell it's .4 fluid, potentially if the camera will focus, because you can see the paint that's started to strip away here. I believe if you get .4 on paint, it will pretty much strip it. So we're gonna have to be careful here that we don't cause any additional damage to the paintwork here. We've also got, I think these are probably some Shimano, maybe MT200s. I've got these brakes on my bike, and yeah, to be fair, they're bled perfectly fine. I would imagine somebody's replaced this recently because it does look fairly new. But again, that's one less thing that we have to do. So I think really try and get my hands on some .4 fluid by tomorrow, and then I'm gonna have a go at rebleeding these. So one of the first things I noticed when I was cleaning the bike was how dirty the drivetrain was. It was coated in a really thick layer of old solidified oil and grease. It was really dirty. And I tried to use a chain cleaner to strip it, but I found that this was really stubbornly on there. So I took the chain off and then put it in a container full of white spirit. Now, the thing is with white spirit, it will strip away that gunk really nicely, but it will also strip away some of the lubricating oil in between the links. And the problem with that, of course, is that then you've got a completely dry chain that needs to be almost dunked in oil to get back into those links. So what I've decided to do instead of that is it's a perfect opportunity to clean this drivetrain up to a really nice level. And then I'm actually going to wax the chain, which I think is a great selling point. And I've used wax on my own personal bike. I think the video I made about that was about 3 years ago. This exact chain right here. And waxing the chain has really made it last a very, very long time. And it was already worn back then. So waxing chain definitely prolongs its life. I also like the fact that, look, I can rub my fingers on it and there is zero residue. One of the reasons I was so excited about this bike is because it's a really high spec. So we've got RockShox Reba forks on the front. These are quite nice units. We've also got SRAM GX on here. So that's even higher than the Boardman that I've got, which has got SRAM NX. So this is an 11-speed bike. Not the biggest cassette at the back, but still, it's got pretty nice hydraulic brakes on the front and rear. And the other thing is it's a very lightweight bike. I think it weighs in at probably about 11.8 kilos, and I think it should sell really well. Right, just while I'm waiting for parts to arrive, I've gone and really cleaned up the chain, brought it out of the spirit this morning and it was looking a bit better, and I've just finished it off with some brake cleaner. So now that should have all the oil out of it and all the debris removed as well, ready for chain waxing. So what I'll do now is I'll get the slow cooker with the wax in it turned on. That might take an hour or so to melt, and then we'll get the chain dunked in there and give it a good wax. Whilst I was waiting for the wax to dry, I moved on to sorting out those rear brakes. Right, so I've just investigated why the back brakes were getting stuck on, and I thought I was going to have to bleed the whole system, potentially even take the entire caliper apart. But what it was a little bit of corrosion, it looked like, on the outside of the interface between the pad and the piston. So the pistons looked like they were a bit gunked up, and so they were getting seized. So what I did was I kind of had to bodge it a little bit and try and get each individual piston out. And then what I did was I took a Q-tip and then cleaned it up and then applied some DOT4 brake fluid to the actual surround of the piston. It was a little bit difficult to show on camera. Now this DOT4 fluid is not particularly nice stuff. It will completely eat away at the paintwork. So I've just got some brake cleaner and sprayed all around this area, all around where the lever is as well, just to remove any potential DOT4 that's left on there. And then I've put it all back together and just tested it now. That as a brake feel feels far better. It was basically before, it was just immediately brake on as soon as you do any little movement. Now it's a lot more modular. I feel like that's going to be a lot better to ride. Anyway, I'm quite happy with how that's turned out, because I initially thought it was going to be quite a bit bigger job than that. So now we can move on to getting the fork disassembled and give that a quick service. Right, so I've just taken the fork to bits, and surprisingly there was a reasonable amount of oil in there. Interestingly, they were a different colour between the left and the right leg, which to me suggests, unless it comes like that from the factory, it suggests to me that potentially it's had a service recently. I mean, maybe the reason it felt so dry is because the seals are so new and they're doing a really good job of actually wiping away the oil from the stanchions. I mean, the stanchions on this bike, they look pretty much immaculate. I don't think I've ever seen a used bike with such good quality of stanchions. So to be honest, this fork is in really good nick, and I'm happy just to put it back together, get some fresh oil in. Right, so I've got the fork close back on, and I've got some 15 weight RockShox oil here, and I think each leg needs about 5 mils. And another leg done as well. So just need to bolt these back up and then get the fork back on the bike. Right, so the replacement seat post has arrived. Just looks miles better. I think that will really nicely clean up the bike. So we'll get the saddle on and get it on the bike now. Now that the wax was completely dry, I had to loosen up the chain links and install them onto the drivetrain before re-indexing the gears. I then gave the frame a freshen up with some bike protectant spray, and now it's time to see the before and after. So I think that's pretty much it. There's not really much more I can do on this bike. The one thing I'll just say is I'm really happy how this one has come up. I think if I was buying a second-hand bike, this is pretty much the standard that I would want to buy, you know, freshly serviced, all working correctly, the little defects and stuff with the paint known about. I'm hoping whoever this goes to is really happy with it. If it wasn't a size medium, I would probably be tempted to keep this one. So I've taken some photos of the bike outside, and I think really the only thing left to do on this now is list it. So in terms of my spend on this bike, the seat post was $12.99. The .4 fluid was £4.48, but I only used a small amount of that. So I'm going to say maybe 45p's worth of .4 fluid. Fork oil cost £6.75, but again, I only used about 10 mil of that, so about 70p's worth. So our total costs then are £214.11. I just want to note as well, because a few people have picked up on this in the last episode, I'm not including my operating costs as part of this challenge. I don't want to convolute the numbers too much, and they're very much variable depending on every bike and every person and how they operate. But if you're interested, it's usually less than £10 per bike, and I'll go through all those numbers at the end of this series. To stand any chance of being able to double our money, I'd have to list it at £430. And I thought what I'll do is I'll put the listing up. I was going on holiday for a week anyway, so I'd just see what bids and offers we got, and then I'd basically go with the highest when I got back. So I received offers of £250. I received offer of £300 and £320. In the end, the highest bid, best offer, whatever, was £350. So while in the end we weren't able to double our money on this one, we did make £136 of profit. which is almost double what we made on the first bike for a fraction of the time spent. So I think the hourly rate on this one is actually very good. So the reason that I don't think I was able to get as much money for this as I was hoping was because there was a lot of very similar listings to this up that were not in as great a condition, but were around the kind of high 200s to low 300s mark. Although this bike, yeah, it comes with a full service. I think the listing was good. I think the condition of the bike was good. Ultimately, for a lot of people, when they're buying a secondhand bike, they don't really care so much about those things, and they'll just go for the cheapest option. And in terms of our cash pot for the next episode, so we started off the episode with a cash pot of £230, and now we have effectively £366 to spend on the next episode. So I'm really looking forward to that. So to watch the next episode, click the series playlist here. And if you're all caught up, make sure to click here to be notified of my future uploads. Thank you.